The Skeleton Key by Peter E. Homan. Adventure Series Number 5. Chapter 1. Together again. I can see them, Annie shouted, jumping up and down on the back of Father's new bakkie. He had traded in his shiny sedan for this monstrosity, partly because he didn't want his lovely vehicle damaged by the dirt roads around Devil's Leap, but mostly because he wanted his car to be bigger than Mr. Darvil and Mr. Bailey's. Okay, calm down, Mother laughed from inside the cabin. We only let you ride on the back for this last bit of dirt road if you promise to remain calm. Annie stopped her jumping and held onto the roll bar as she watched the Darvil dogs, Butter and Peanut, excitedly storm up the road to come and meet their visitors. Father stopped the bakkie as the dogs began happily jumping at the open driver's side window before Annie opened the back latch and they jumped on. Good boys, Annie screamed in joy as they lapped at her face and wagged their tails. Oh, it is good to be back on the farm, isn't it? Mother said. Father smiled broadly and, in the back seat, sat Robert laughing at the smiling faces on the back staring at him and licking at the rear window. It feels like an eternity since we've been on the farm, Robert said as they pulled around the final corner leading towards Darvil Manor. In fact, it had been nearly 9 months since the children's last adventure on Devil's Leap, and while the farm remained mostly the same, they had all grown up quite a bit. Robert thought back to the first time they had met the Darvils. The farm was in dire straits, suffering from the longest drought in recorded history. During their second visit, however, 3 months later, the farm was as it was today, lush and green with herds of antelope frolicking around the old diamond fields. There we go, said Father as he steered towards the open gate. Ellie and Anton were waiting for them at the old stables, waving happily and looking on as they pulled into an open parking spot. Ellie was going to high school in the following term, which meant that she would be going to boarding school in the city. This was both exciting and a little bit scary, as an entirely new world awaited her. Anton, on the other hand, was fast outgrowing Robert, who had remained the same height since their previous adventure along the coast. Annie jumped from the back of the bakkie when it came to a halt, followed by Butter and Peanut, who leapt from the sides and began circling and smelling at their visitors. Oh, it's so lovely to see you, said Mother as she took turns in embracing Anton and Ellie. You kids have grown up so much. Indeed, said Robert, who slid from the bakkie, as he and Anton stared each other straight in the eyes. They shared a familiar handshake before Ellie rushed forward and gave him a hearty hug. Where's Annie? Ellie asked, glancing towards the back of the bakkie. I'll be right there, Annie shouted, struggling to unload a large duffel bag off the low bed. Let me give you a hand, said Anton, who darted towards the back of the bakkie. What on earth is in there? He added, seeing the strain across Annie's face. It's presents, said Annie excitedly. It was, after all, nearly Christmas and she was determined to make it the best one any of them had ever celebrated. I hope you guys didn't overdo it, laughed Ellie as she watched Annie and Anton struggling with the bag. Ellie, Annie shouted, dropping her side of the bag, and rushing towards the older girl. She threw her arms around her and let out a happy sigh. I can't believe you're going to the big school next year. Me neither, said Ellie. But at least I'll be in the city, so we can visit each other whenever we want. That would be awesome, said Annie. Maybe we can have you over on the weekends. She looked towards Mother for confirmation and smiled. Of course, Mother replied. You're never too far from home when you have friends nearby. Where are your parents? Father asked. He had been looking forward to showing off his new bakkie to Mr. Darvil and Mr. Bailey, who always seemed to snicker whenever they saw his sedan struggle on the dirt road. But mainly he was excited to see his good old friends once again. They're in the backyard, said Ellie. Father set up the spit for the braai. They all shared an excited look. If there was one thing that made their visits to Devil's Leap even more of a treat than gallivanting around with their friends, it was the food they enjoyed on their visits. Annie darted towards the backyard, forgetting all about the large bag of presents, and cheering as a column of smoke rose from over the house. I guess we'll just take this inside then, shall we? said Robert as he stared at the abandoned end of the large bag, the other end still firmly gripped in Anton's hand. The boys were the best of friends now, and it was hard to remember a time when their friendship wasn't a key feature in their lives. They were both going to grade 7 in the year to come, their last year of primary school, and while they were still itching for adventure, a sense of maturity had become a part of their friendship. "How have you been?" asked Anton as he and Robert each took a hold of either end of the large bag and began lugging it towards the house. "I've been all right," Robert said, noticing the difference in stature between him and Anton. "It looks like you've become quite a bit stronger since the last time we saw you." "Mother said it's a growth spurt," said Anton. He looked somewhat uncomfortable, as if he were still becoming used to his new frame. "It happens to boys around your age," said Ellie happily. "Who knows? The next time we see you, you might have outgrown all of us." She placed a friendly hand on Robert's shoulder, and he sighed. It couldn't come quickly enough, he thought. "Oh, I am so happy to see you," exclaimed Mrs. Darvil as she came dancing from the house. She had an enormous smile across her face as she embraced them each in turn. "How was your drive down here?" "Quite uneventful," said Father, waiting for her to notice his brand new baccy. Mother rolled her eyes playfully and tilted her head in the shiny vehicle's direction, hinting to Mrs. Darvil that she should notice. "And this?" she asked excitedly. "Oh, my new baccy?" asked Father, not at all fooled by Mother's hint but still beaming proudly. "Just a little Christmas present to myself." "Well, you have to show Archie," said Mrs. Darvil. "But first, let's get you all settled in, you must be exhausted." The sun was casting long shadows over the backyard of Darvil Manor, and the comforting aroma of lamb on the spit was only overshadowed by the level of merriness in the conversation being had. "I think I hear them coming," shouted Annie before shoving another cupcake into her mouth and rushing towards the front gate. She skipped around the old museum building and disappeared around the corner. "She hasn't changed a bit, has she?" laughed Ellie as the others stared after her. "Same old Annie," Robert replied. There was a pause as the others waited for Annie to return, but instead, she called out to them to come and help. "What do you think that's about?" asked Anton as they jumped up and made their way to where Annie was calling from. Mr. Bailey's baccy stood in the driveway towards the stables. Annie was jumping up and down excitedly at the back when the rear passenger doors flung open. Out popped Toomey, who upon seeing her friends, darted towards them, her arms waving. She wrapped her arms around Robert and looked up at him with her eyes glistening. "It's so great to see you guys again," she said before turning around to see her brother, Temba, coming up the rear. He too had grown since they last saw him, and although he was still a shy bit shorter than Anton, he had become bulkier. "Why is she so excited?" asked Robert, pointing towards his sister after he and Temba had shared a handshake. "We brought dessert," Toomey replied happily. The others stared at Annie, who helped Mrs. Bailey unload tray after tray from the back of the baccy. "Dessert for us, or for an entire army?" Ellie joked as they watched the trays being piled up. "Look at all this," exclaimed Annie as she came strolling towards them with a large tray of malva pudding. "There's so much more. Where on earth did you get all this?" asked Robert. "We went to the church's Christmas bazaar in town," said Temba. "They have all sorts of activities and treats around the place." "That sounds like fun," said Robert. "Now, let's help your parents unload the baccy. It seems like there's still quite a bit to be unpacked." It was an evening of merriness and happy recollection of the children's previous adventures. Annie and Toomey reenacted some of their greatest hits. "How about the time you clambered down the side of the house to sneak into the library?" said Ellie, as Annie steadied herself to try and climb up the green ivies again. "Best not to try and imitate that one," said Robert. "We don't want to get into trouble so early on in our visit, now do we?" Annie bit the inside of her cheek and stared at her brother. "I guess so," she finally replied. "Never mind that," said Temba as he placed his arm around Annie's shoulder. "There's another surprise waiting for us in the kitchen." Annie's eyes lit up as she stared up at the boy. "What is it?" she asked. "Let's go and see," Temba said as he led them to the kitchen. There was a large plastic container on the table. Annie had noticed it when they unloaded the bakkie but didn't ask what was inside. "Is that what I think it is?" said Ellie excitedly as Toomey and Temba happily pulled the container closer. They flipped open the lid and inside the large plastic box popped out a collection of dazzlingly bright colors and the sweetest of smells. "Candy floss," Annie exclaimed before lunging forward. "I can't remember the last time I had candy floss," said Robert as he watched Annie's eyes reflect the bright colors. "We don't really have too many fairs or bazaars in the city. Can we have some?" Annie asked happily. Temba nodded and the little girl pulled a piece of the sugary goodness from within the box. She chomped down and the candy floss dissolved on her tongue. "It tickles," she added as she placed another piece on her tongue and held it out for the others to see. There was a chorus of giggles and joyous laughter as the children took turns in feeling the sugar dissolve in their mouths when Mother called to them that dinner was ready.